You know, people always tell you that retirement is supposed to be the golden hour, the time when the noise of the world finally fades into a gentle hum. But as the gavel of Judge Harrison slammed down like a thunderclap inside that sterile courtroom, sealing the fate of a $180,000 mistake, I realized that sometimes peace isn't something you find. It's something you have to fight for with a surveyor's tape and a lawyer who knows how to wield a statute like a scalpel. It was a Tuesday, the kind of crisp, clear morning that usually signals a fresh start, when Sterling Blackwood, the pompous, self-appointed king of Oakhaven Heights, collapsed onto the courtroom floor in a heap of expensive Italian wool and shattered ego, his face draining of color until it looked like wet ash, while his wife, Cynthia, let out this sound, a strangled, desperate sob that echoed off the mahogany walls, realizing that her dream kitchen, the one with the imported marble island and the custom espresso bar, now belonged to me, the quiet widower they had spent 8 miserable months trying to crush. But to understand how a man like me, Arthur Vance, a 61-year-old retired civil surveyor who just wanted to grow heritage tomatoes and read mystery novels, ended up owning a luxury mansion addition that I didn't pay a dime for, you have to go back to the beginning, back to when I thought moving to Oakhaven Heights was the answer to my grief. After my wife, Eleanor, passed away from that long, brutal battle with ovarian cancer, the silence in our old house was deafening, a constant reminder of the conversations we weren't having. So I packed up 30 years of memories and surveying equipment, thinking a change of scenery, specifically a manicured community with strict rules and identical mailboxes, would give me the structure I needed to keep from falling apart. I had spent 3 decades measuring the world, defining boundaries for Kingston County, telling feuding neighbors exactly where their grass ended and the next guy's began, so I thought I was done with conflict, done with the petty squabbles of property lines. But fate, it seems, has a twisted sense of humor. The moving truck had barely cleared the horizon when Cynthia Blackwood appeared at the edge of my driveway, clutching a clipboard like it was a holy text, her hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection that probably cost more than my first car, and she didn't welcome me with a pie or a handshake. No, she hit me with a violation notice for unauthorized visibility of professional equipment, because my garage door was open for 10 minutes while I unpacked. That should have been the red flag, the siren wailing in the distance. But I just wanted peace, so I apologized, tucked my gear away, and tried to blend in, meeting the neighbors like Detective Leo Rossi, a good man with tired eyes who lived across the street, and the Hendersons, retired teachers who warned me about the HOA president with nervous glances toward the massive house on the corner lot. That house belonged to Sterling, a man who wore golf polos that screamed, "new money," and possessed a handshake that felt less like a greeting and more like a dominance display. And when he told me about his upcoming project, a grand entertainment expansion that would elevate the entire neighborhood's value, I nodded along, not realizing that his definition of expansion involved treating my property rights as a mere suggestion. The real war started on a Saturday in mid-April, a day I had earmarked for planting my vegetable garden, armed with nothing but a trowel and the simple desire to feel dirt under my fingernails. But as I stepped into the backyard, the morning air was shattered by the rhythmic beeping of heavy machinery, a sound I knew too well from years on construction sites. I walked to the back fence, expecting to see a pool installation or a patio repair, but what I saw made my surveyor's heart skip a dangerous beat, because there, sitting squarely on what I knew with geometric certainty was my land, was an excavator tearing up the earth, preparing to pour concrete footings for a structure that was already sprawling across the invisible line that separated Sterling's kingdom from my sanctuary. I tried to be reasonable, I really did, walking over to the foreman with the calm demeanor of a man who has defused hundreds of these situations, asking to see the plans, and when he unrolled them, the audacity was breathtaking, a 24-foot extension on a lot that only had 12 feet of clearance, meaning Sterling Blackwood wasn't just inching over the line, he was annexing my backyard like a colonial power. I went straight to his door, my heart hammering not from exertion but from the sheer shock of the violation, and there he was, holding a Bloody Mary, smiling that oily, politician smile, dismissing my concerns with waves of his hand, telling me that the city approved it, the architectural committee approved it, and that modern development sometimes required flexibility that old-timers like me just couldn't understand. Property lines are legal facts, Sterling, not interpretations. I told him, my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my gut. But he just chuckled, a condescending sound that made my skin crawl, and told me that if I wanted to be a difficult resident, I would find that Oakhaven Heights could be a very lonely place, a threat veiled in suburban politeness that hit harder than a shouted curse. He thought I was just some lonely old man, a pushover who would fold under the weight of his title and his connections. But he made a critical error, a fatal miscalculation that arrogant men often make. He forgot to check who he was fighting, because you don't spend 30 years working for Kingston County Survey Department without learning how to document a war. The next morning, I didn't plant tomatoes. I went to war, dusting off my Trimble GPS unit, the kind that can pinpoint a location to within a fraction of an inch, and I began to locate the iron pins buried deep in the soil, the original markers from the 1980 subdivision plat that no amount of landscaping could erase. I found the front corner, then the side, and finally, the rear boundary, and the math was undeniable, cold and hard and beautiful in its precision, proving that the concrete forms currently drying in the sun were sitting 12 full feet onto my deeded property, a theft of nearly 300 square feet of land that Sterling had decided was his for the taking. I documented everything, taking photos, logging coordinates, creating a file that would hold up in the highest court in the land. But Sterling wasn't done, and when he saw me out there with my tripod and my orange vest, he didn't apologize, he escalated, slapping me with fines for unapproved landscaping because of my survey stakes, fines for harassment of contractors, fines that totaled hundreds of dollars a day, a clear attempt to bleed me dry until I capitulated. I stood in my kitchen, looking at the stack of violation notices taped to my door like a scarlet letter, listening to a voicemail from Sterling's lawyer, a man named Preston Gage, threatening me with lawsuits for defamation and interference if I didn't back down and accept a generous offer to buy the sliver of land for pennies on the dollar. They thought they had me cornered, thought the fear of foreclosure and financial ruin would silence me, but they didn't know about Eleanor's voice in my head, reminding me that the truth is the only thing worth fighting for. So I picked up the phone and called Evelyn Cross, the toughest property attorney in the state, a woman who ate bullies for breakfast, and when I laid out the evidence on her oak desk, she didn't just see a trespass case. She saw something much, much darker and infinitely more satisfying. She pulled out a thick volume of state property law, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light, and pointed to a statute I had never heard of, something called the doctrine of accession, a legal concept that says if a person builds a permanent structure on your land without your permission, and if removing it would cause waste, the landowner doesn't just get damages, they get to keep the whole damn building. The concept of accession sounded almost too good to be true, like a fairy tale written for aggrieved homeowners. But Evelyn Cross assured me that under the laws of Texas, specifically Property Code Section 23.102, we were looking at a loaded gun, because Sterling Blackwood wasn't just building a shed. He was constructing a luxury wing with a foundation that was already cured and framing that was going up by the hour, an improvement so substantial that no judge would order it demolished if there was another option. The strategy Evelyn proposed was a gamble, a game of high-stakes chicken where I had to sit on my hands and watch them build, watch them pour money and labor into a structure on my land, letting the trap snap shut only when the investment was too big to walk away from, while simultaneously enduring the daily assault of fines and social isolation Sterling orchestrated. Every day was a test of willpower, watching the contractors install premium lumber, watching the roofline take shape, while my mailbox filled with increasingly aggressive demands from the Oakhaven board, threatening liens against my house if I didn't pay the thousands of dollars in bogus penalties they had racked up. Sterling even posted a video of me on the neighborhood social media page, edited to make me look like a deranged, shouting lunatic harassing innocent workers, and the comments were brutal. Neighbors I hadn't even met calling me a bitter old man and saying I should be evicted for the good of the community, which stung more than I wanted to admit, isolating me in a house that already felt too empty. But I wasn't entirely alone, because Detective Leo Rossi had started digging on his own, pulling permits and background checks, and what he found turned this from a simple boundary dispute into a potential criminal conspiracy, revealing that Sterling had done this before, 17 times to be exact, always in communities where he sat on the board, using his position to approve his own company, Blackwood Estates Limited, to do work that encroached on common areas or neighbors' lots, bullying anyone who complained into silence. It was a racket, a systematic grift where he used the HOA's legal power as a shield for his personal construction empire. And when I took this information to journalist Sarah Jenkins, an investigative reporter with a reputation for burning down corrupt institutions, she looked at my folder of evidence like it was the Pulitzer Prize wrapped in a bow. We decided to wait, to let the construction finish, to let Sterling believe he had won. So for weeks I endured his smug waves from across the lawn, his mocking comments about learning to live with progress. While inside my house, the evidence file grew thicker, and Sarah's article, titled "The HOA Warlord," was being drafted with lethal precision. By late October, the addition was nearly complete, a stunning piece of architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows, that famous Italian marble island, and a wine fridge that cost more than my first year of college. And Sterling was preparing to host a grand unveiling party, completely unaware that the legal papers Evelyn had just filed were about to turn his celebration into a wake. The morning the article dropped, it was like a bomb went off in Oakhaven Heights. Phones started ringing off the hook. Neighbors were gathering in driveways holding newspapers, realizing that the man they had trusted, the man they had feared, was actually a predator who had been stealing from them for years. Sterling tried to do damage control, sending out emails calling the story fake news and slander, but the evidence was in black and white: the GPS coordinates, the fake permits, the testimonies from other victims Sarah had tracked down, and suddenly the tide turned. The isolation I had felt evaporated as people like the Hendersons came to my door to apologize, admitting they had been too scared to speak up about their own issues with Blackwood Estates. Then came the lawsuit, the petition for quiet title and award of improvements, served to Sterling on a Wednesday evening. And I will never forget the phone call I received minutes later, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and genuine panic, screaming that I was a thief, that I couldn't steal his house, that he would bury me in litigation until I died. "I'm not stealing anything, Sterling," I told him, my voice calm, the ghost of Eleanor standing beside me. "I'm just accepting the generous gift you built on my property, per the laws of this state." And for the first time, there was silence on the other end, the heavy, terrified silence of a bully who realizes he has finally punched the wrong victim. The district attorney, sensing blood in the water and armed with the evidence Detective Rossi had compiled, opened a criminal investigation into Sterling's business dealings, freezing his assets and effectively tying his hands, leaving him with no choice but to face me in civil court, not as the powerful developer, but as a desperate defendant trying to salvage his retirement dream. The days leading up to the trial were a blur of depositions and strategy meetings, but I kept walking into my backyard, looking at that magnificent structure, touching the smooth stucco, feeling a strange sense of ownership settling in, not of the luxury, but of the justice it represented. When we finally walked into Judge Harrison's courtroom, the air was thick enough to choke on. Sterling sitting there with his legal team, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, his skin pasty, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, while Cynthia sat behind him, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, looking like she was attending a funeral. Evelyn was magnificent, laying out our case with the precision of a surgeon, showing the judge the survey maps, the overlay of the foundation, the willful negligence of the permit application, tearing apart Sterling's defense that it was an honest mistake by pointing out the 12-foot discrepancy that even a child could see was intentional. Sterling's lawyer, Preston Gage, tried to argue unjust enrichment, tried to say that giving me the building would be unfair, offering a pitiful settlement of $75,000. But the judge wasn't having it, cutting him off to ask why Sterling had threatened foreclosure instead of offering settlement months ago, pinning him to the wall with his own malicious behavior. It was the moment of truth, the culmination of months of stress, sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of standing alone against a tyrant. And as Judge Harrison reviewed the final documents, the silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles, his gaze lingering on the stack of evidence that detailed every threat, every fake fine, and every inch of stolen earth, before he finally looked up, locking eyes with Sterling Blackwood in a way that signaled the end of an era. He began to speak, his voice low and measured, citing the Johnson versus Riverside precedent, dismantling the defense's argument that this was a mere clerical error, and stating clearly that when a developer uses intimidation and fraud to build on another man's land, the law offers no sanctuary, no compensation, and absolutely no mercy. Mr. Vance, the judge said, turning to me, the court finds that the defendant acted with willful disregard for your property rights. And with those words, he awarded me full, permanent ownership of the structure, valued at $180,000, plus legal fees, essentially handing me the keys to Sterling's masterpiece while the man himself disintegrated before our eyes. That was when the collapse happened, the physical manifestation of his ruin, Sterling sliding out of his chair as his legs gave way, gasping for air while Cynthia screamed my name in a mix of hatred and heartbreak, unable to comprehend that the universe had just corrected itself in the most brutal way possible. I walked out of that courthouse not with a sense of jubilation, but with a profound sense of relief, the keys to the addition heavy in my pocket, knowing that the nightmare was over. But as I stood in the doorway of the newly acquired luxury wing a week later, admiring the gleaming hardwood floors and the ridiculous espresso machine, I felt a hollowness, realizing that Eleanor wasn't there to share it, and that hoarding this trophy felt too much like something Sterling would do. I remembered my wife's favorite saying, that blessings are only blessings if they're shared, so I called a meeting, not an official HOA tribunal, but a gathering of neighbors, the Hendersons, Detective Rossi, the young couple from down the street, inviting them into the space that had been built on corruption and lies. I don't need a wine fridge or a marble island, I told them, standing in the center of the room, but we need a place to be a community. And right then and there, we decided to turn the addition into the Oakhaven Community Center, a place for potlucks, graduation parties, and town halls, a neutral ground where no one had to fear a clipboard-wielding tyrant. The $47,000 in legal fees I was awarded went straight into a scholarship fund, the Vance Blackwood Education Grant, a touch of irony that I hoped would teach future generations about integrity, helping kids like Detective Rossi's daughter, Mia, go to engineering school. Sterling avoided prison by taking a plea deal that banned him from ever holding an HOA position or a contractor's license again, forcing him and Cynthia to move 2 towns over in shame. Their house sold to a lovely family with twin toddlers who ran across the lawns without fear of fines. The neighborhood transformed, the fear lifted like a heavy fog, replaced by the sound of laughter from the community center, the smell of barbecue on weekends, and the sight of neighbors actually talking to each other instead of hiding behind blinds. I was back in my garden the next spring, finally planting those heritage tomatoes in the soil that was indisputably mine, watching the sun glint off the windows of the community center where a group of students were studying for finals, and I realized that while I had lost the quiet retirement I planned, I had found something better, a purpose. But as I recount this story, looking at the scar on the land that became a monument to justice, I have to ask you, was it right to take everything from him, to seize a man's life savings and humiliating him so completely? Or is that simply the price of greed in a world that too often lets the bullies win? Justice is a funny thing, often cold, sometimes cruel, but always necessary, and I sleep just fine at night knowing that the line in the sand I drew wasn't just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told they're too small to fight back. So tell me, would you have kept the house, or would you have burned it down?